We signed without you, Marcus said, smiling. Cash beats dreams. Lawyers laughed softly while my name vanished from page margins. David avoided eye contact, counting zeros like rosary beads today. Mom whispered, "Don't fight here," as papers scraped the table. I swallowed pride and said, "You sold our father's field." The county clerk stamped documents while fluorescent lights hummed indifferent. The air smelled like toner, disappointment, and old courthouse dust. Marcus shook hands with buyers wearing boots polished like new pennies. David pocketed a pen, then pocketed his guilt just as neatly. I stared at the plat map, feeling my heart beat under fingerprints. Our land sat outside Pryor, 200 acres of stubborn earth. Dad said grass remembers footsteps even after the feet are gone. We learned fence lines before we learned multiplication and long division. Summers meant hay bales, diesel smells, and cicadas scoring the evenings. Marcus loved numbers more, chasing profit like a carnival prize. David loved safety. He followed Marcus like cattle follow grain. I loved plans, barn restorations, soil recovery, and a farm school. After Dad's stroke, we promised to keep the land whole. Promises, I learned, are lighter than checks when grief turns negotiable. Today, ink outweighed blood, and I felt it settling heavy. "Think bigger," Marcus said, tapping spreadsheets like a magician revealing cards. "Developers love lakeside parcels. Timing matters more than sentiment," he added. The buyer, a man named Kent, grinned around words like synergy. He promised townhouses, a marina, and a retail village sparkling weekends. David nodded, repeating phrases he barely understood but liked their shape. "You'll thank us," Marcus said, "when you see your percentage wired." "There is no percentage," I replied. "You dissolved me months ago." He shrugged, calling it restructuring, then blamed attorney language for confusion. Mom flinched when I laughed, because grief turns bitter when cornered. I folded the map, feeling my childhood crinkle into a square. Outside, Oklahoma wind pushed heat across courthouse steps like a warning. July baked the parking lot until tar smelled like burned sugar. Kent slapped Marcus's shoulder, promising groundbreaking by Christmas with televised ceremony. David checked his reflection in truck glass, smoothing hair he didn't trust. Mom touched my arm, whispering, "Don't make enemies you'll regret later." "I already have brothers I regret," I said, trying to smile. She sighed, sadness pooling where pride used to live comfortably. Across the street, a feed store closed early for a funeral. Maybe they knew a farm was dying here, only paperwork calling it growth. I walked to my pickup, keys useless without anywhere worth driving. The field rolled toward the water, quiet as an old hymn. Cottonwoods flickered silver, and cattle watched like disinterested jurors nearby. I parked by the gate Dad welded during a blackout once. He taught me patience with sparks, the way steel accepts shape. "Everything living needs time," he'd say, "even stubborn soil and suns." I pressed my forehead against cool wire, counting breath until steady. Behind me, engines started, optimism roaring toward bank accounts and champagne. Ahead, the lake carried wind whispers, promising storms and second chances. I reached for the chain and found it cut cleanly through. That hurt more than signatures. Someone chose speed over courtesy and memory. I drove into Tulsa, where glass towers reflected clouds like counterfeit oceans. A diner on Peoria served coffee strong enough to hold grief. I wrote names on a napkin: Dad, Lydia, Marcus, David, land. Then I drew a rectangle and labeled it "Future They Can't Buy." A waitress named Claire asked if I wanted pie with that. "Only if it fixes everything," I said, and she laughed kindly. "Nothing fixes everything," she said, "but pie helps you sit longer." I sat longer, watching thunderheads stack like arguments along the horizon. A radio mentioned housing starts, and something about opportunity zones expanding. Opportunity for whom, I wondered, feeling my hands shake like leaves. Cal Porter found me there, after Claire texted the number I scribbled. Cal taught shop class before the district cut budgets and patience. He smelled like cedar, machine oil, and porch screens after summer rain. "Heard your brothers traded soil for glass," he said, easing down. I nodded, because words were heavier than coffee refills tonight. Cal unfolded my napkin, read silently, then cleared his throat slowly. "Land isn't the only place to grow something real," he said. "Start with scraps. Honest hands can outlast any groundbreaking ceremony." The idea didn't click. It settled, like seed after a storm. I exhaled, feeling anger convert to heat I could finally use. We walked out under a sky bruised purple and restless with lightning. Cal pointed toward an old warehouse behind the rail spur downtown. City's auctioning that husk for pennies, he said, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. You could make a maker space, teach what your father taught, teach what Dad taught, measure twice, cut straight, respect grain lines. Not nostalgia, he said, but a working place for apprenticeships. Communities need trades the way fields need rain, he added. They'll fund results, not tears. Give them both with dignity. The rain began, slow first, then certain, washing courthouse dust from boots. I pictured workbenches where contracts couldn't steal what hands created. I returned to the field once more before night swallowed the fences. Fireflies climbed the dusk like tiny lanterns rehearsing for harvest. I knelt where Dad preferred shade and whispered apology and intention. They sold our dreams for cash, I said, voice steady despite everything. I'll build one they can't. Buy, and I'll open its doors. Wind pushed through the grass, agreeing without ceremony or applause. Behind me, Tulsa glowed like a promise made by electricity. Ahead, the lake kept breathing, patient, unconcerned with human schedules. I stood, taller than before, even without land under title. Tomorrow, I would find keys to something that couldn't be purchased. At home, I boxed the plat maps and locked Dad's hammer away. Not to hide it, but to carry it when ready. I listed my tools, inventorying hope like a careful quartermaster. Cal texted an auction link, and I bookmarked it twice quickly. Mom called, voice trembling, asking if I'd come for Sunday dinner. I will, I said, and I'll bring a plan this time. She didn't ask what, maybe afraid of choosing sides again. I lay awake, hearing trains move like arteries through sleeping neighborhoods. Somewhere, developers toasted renderings that forgot the smell of hay. I smiled in the dark, because my revenge would smell like cedar. Rock Bottom didn't roar. It whispered through empty mornings and unfinished plans. A week after the courthouse, I stood in the warehouse Cal mentioned, staring at rot. The roof leaked like gilt, walls bowed inward, and pigeons ruled the rafters. You sure this is worth saving? Cal asked, sweeping dust aside. So is our field, I said, forcing conviction I barely owned. The city clerk handed me a deed that smelled of mildew and bureaucracy. I had 6 months to renovate or lose ownership back to auction. My savings barely covered taxes, but dignity doesn't need much room to grow. You'll need faith, Cal said, locking the door behind us that first night. I nodded, thinking faith sounded a lot like stubbornness wearing better shoes. Days blurred into a cycle of sweat, sawdust, and self-doubt. The warehouse echoed every failure like a sermon meant only for me. I slept on a cot in one corner, coffee pot humming louder than hope. Mom called every Sunday, pretending not to hear how tired I sounded. Your father would be proud, she said once, though pride felt distant as rain. Marcus sent no word, but David mailed me an old photo of the farm. On the back, he'd written, I miss when things were simple. I laughed quietly, because simplicity doesn't exist. It's just honesty before greed arrives. Cal stopped by evenings, bringing tools, jokes, and stubborn encouragement. You're not broke, he said once. You're just paying tuition to life. I believed him some days. Other days, I cursed every nail that bent. Money vanished faster than progress, like time working for someone else's clock. I sold my truck, bought lumber, and learned which muscles complained before giving in. Nights, I'd sit by the open door, watching freight trains cut through downtown. Their horns sounded like ghosts calling men who still believed in motion. I envied that sound, direction without destination, but envy builds nothing tangible. Claire from the diner brought dinner twice a week, pretending it was extra food. You look thinner, she said, setting containers down without eye contact. Working off bad blood, I said, wiping sweat from my neck. She smiled gently, replying, then make sure you replace it with something good. After she left, the warehouse felt bigger, like hope needed more room to breathe. Winter came early that year, turning concrete floors into frozen reminders. I wore Dad's old jacket, patches over patches, warmth stitched with memory. The roof still leaked, dripping steady over my blueprint table every night. Cal suggested hiring help, but money stayed theoretical, like praise before results. You can't rebuild alone, he warned, handing me a flask for courage. Maybe, I said, but if I fail, I'd rather do it quietly. Failure, I discovered, doesn't always break you. It just teaches new vocabulary for pain. I learned the language of scarcity, splinters, and self-reliance one bruise at a time. Some nights I dreamed of the field, whole again, sun glowing gold. I'd wake with fists clenched, ready to work like redemption was measured hourly. Then came the storm, a real one this time, with thunder that cracked windows wide. Rain flooded through the half-fixed roof, undoing weeks of fragile progress. I stood there helpless, water soaking tools, floor, and faith all at once. "Guess God's testing your warranty," Cal said when he arrived with sandbags. We worked until dawn, ankle deep, mud swirling like resentment around our boots. When morning came, the warehouse looked like a shipwrecked dream. I sat on a beam, head in my hands, laughter breaking through despair. "You still breathing?" Cal asked, voice gentle despite exhaustion. "Barely," I said, "but that's enough for now." He grinned, replying, "Then tomorrow we rebuild again. That's what builders do." After the storm, donations trickled in, not money, but kindness from strangers. Claire started a tip jar at the diner labeled Aaron's Ark Project. Local high school kids came weekends, hammering crooked nails and laughing loudly. "We're building something real," one said, wiping grease from his cheek. I wanted to believe it, but belief requires results, not effort alone. Still, their noise filled the emptiness, and silence no longer ruled the space. Even Mom visited, bringing blankets and sandwiches wrapped like care packages. "You look like your father," she said softly, touching my arm with pride. For the first time since losing the land, I didn't feel smaller than my loss. Rock bottom had become foundation, ugly, uneven, but solid enough to start climbing. The first step toward rebuilding wasn't a grand plan. It was a broom and a borrowed heater. The warehouse floor was still slick from the storm, my hands raw from hauling soaked boards outside. Cal stood by the door, lighting his pipe like a man who'd seen worse. "Days. It's still standing," he said, exhaling smoke that curled toward the cracked ceiling. "So are you." I nodded, though I didn't feel standing anywhere inside. Every corner smelled of wet dust and oil, but beneath it was potential, faint but stubborn. That morning I drew a line on the concrete with chalk and labeled it, "Start here." It was childish maybe, but I needed to see where beginning started again. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt like a challenge worth breathing in. Word about the Ark project spread through town faster than I expected. Local teens showed up after school asking for odd jobs, curious more than kind. I gave them hammers, gloves, and my father's rules. Measure twice, cut straight, clean after yourself. They listened, laughed, and left behind more footprints than mistakes. Cal supervised from his lawn chair, shouting tips between sips of black coffee. "You're running a trade school now," he joked. "Better start charging tuition." I smiled because it wasn't far from what I'd envisioned months ago. We cleared debris, fixed joists, and patched leaks one payday at a time. Each improvement looked small, but small began to feel like progress again. Hope didn't arrive all at once. It trickled in like light through patched roof seams. Claire became our unofficial foreman, clipboard in hand and temper fierce as summer. "You're not running a barn," she said one afternoon, arms crossed. "If you want investors, it has to look professional, not sentimental." I wanted to argue, but she was right. Nostalgia doesn't pay electricians or insurance. She made flyers, updated social media, and got the local paper interested. The first article titled me, "The Man Who Wouldn't Sell Out." It made me laugh, but secretly, it healed something inside that words rarely touched. Donations followed, mostly small checks, sometimes handwritten notes from people I'd never met. One said, "You remind me of my father's kind of America." I taped it above the entrance, a daily reminder of why we were building. For the first time since losing the field, my dream had witnesses. By spring, the warehouse no longer echoed emptiness. It buzzed with creation. We built wooden benches, metal frames, and prototypes for student projects. Cal taught welding on weekends, sparks flying like fireflies caught in daylight. I handled carpentry and design, my hands remembering lessons Dad whispered years ago. "Wood talks," he'd said once. "You just have to listen through the noise." Every beam we shaped felt like a conversation between then and now. The kids began calling it Wade Works, joking it sounded like a superhero hideout. Claire laughed but ordered a sign anyway, claiming branding mattered more than modesty. I hung it crooked on purpose, like truth that didn't need perfection to stand proud. When the lights came on that night, they reflected off sawdust like small miracles. Not everyone believed in what I was building, especially my brothers. Marcus heard about the project through local news and sent a one-line email. You're wasting time fixing a barn that won't feed anyone. David stayed quiet, though rumor said their developments were struggling already. I didn't reply, not out of pride, but peace. I had nothing left to prove. Cal read the message over my shoulder and muttered, "Money talks loudest before it's broke." I chuckled, returning to work, hands steady over fresh-cut pine. Revenge didn't look like anger anymore. It looked like continuation. Every screw I tightened felt like a quiet rebuttal to greed. "They sold our dreams," I whispered once, "but I'm making mine non-transferable." Cal smiled, saying, "That's the best kind. They don't come with a receipt." In early May, a small storm ripped through Tulsa again, testing our new roof. I stayed inside that night, listening as rain pounded but didn't leak through. When it finally stopped, I turned the lights on and stared upward. Dry, not a single drip, just silence and the hum of stability earned. It felt small to anyone else, but to me, it was victory in wood and steel. Claire arrived the next morning with breakfast, her grin wide and proud. "It survived," she said, handing me coffee like a trophy. "So did we," I replied, voice steadier than I'd felt in years. She nodded, whispering, "That's how you know it's real. You stop checking for collapse." That morning, I realized the foundation wasn't concrete. It was courage hardened by time. By summer, Wade Works officially opened as a community trade hub. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was humble, just neighbors, students, and one local reporter. Mom stood near the back, clutching Dad's old hammer like a relic of faith. "He'd be smiling," she whispered when I hugged her after the speeches. "Not for the building," I said softly, "but for what we're teaching inside it." Cal made a toast with lemonade, calling me the most stubborn man in Oklahoma. Laughter filled the space where grief used to echo endlessly. For once, I didn't look for my brothers in the crowd. I didn't need them there. What I built didn't need validation, it needed purpose, and purpose had finally arrived. And for the first time, my dream felt untouchable, because it wasn't for sale. That night, long after everyone left, I stayed behind to sweep the floor. The lights glowed low, and sawdust floated through the air like quiet blessings. I thought about Dad, about the field, about everything money had taken from us. Then I thought about what it could never buy: decency, craft, and earned peace. The hammer hung on the wall, its handle worn smooth from generations. I touched it, whispering, "We made it, old man. We built something honest." Outside, freight trains howled again, but this time they didn't sound lonely. They sounded like movement, proof that even broken things can keep going forward. I locked the doors, knowing tomorrow would bring new hands, new lessons, new life. And in that simple act, I realized revenge had already taken its quiet, perfect shape. Growth didn't arrive as applause. It came disguised as exhaustion and long hours. Every dawn smelled like sawdust and coffee, and every night ended with the hum of machines cooling down. Wade Works had grown from a hopeful project into something that breathed on its own. Students from nearby towns came to learn trades: carpentry, welding, mechanics, even electrical basics. Cal said I'd accidentally built a school without realizing it. "You made a place where folks feel worth something again," he told me once. I just smiled because I wasn't sure what I'd made, only that it worked. Claire managed operations with a clipboard like a weapon, bossing volunteers into precision. Each morning she'd say, "You're not just fixing wood, Aaron, you're fixing people too." I'd laugh, but deep down I hoped she was right. With growth came pressure, the kind that tests a man's patience more than failure ever did. We got contracts from the city to restore abandoned properties around Tulsa's east side. The pay was fair, but deadlines were merciless, and my team was still learning. "This isn't charity anymore," Cal warned, eyes narrowing under his dusty cap. "You're running a real business now, son." The word business made me uneasy, like I was betraying something pure. But I learned that purpose without structure collapses just as fast as greed without conscience. So I adapted, filing paperwork by day and sanding boards by night. Claire teased that I was half man, half blueprint, and mostly stubbornness. She wasn't wrong. The more we grew, the less I slept, but the more alive I felt. Sometimes I'd drive out to the lake where our land once was, just to think. The development was half finished. A field of empty lots and unlit street lamps. The signs read, "Wade Point Estates," a name Marcus probably picked himself. Seeing our family name on something so hollow made my chest tighten. Houses rose without heart, drywall where dreams once grew from dirt. I parked outside the construction fence, headlights dim, remembering Dad's hands covered in clay. They built fast, I whispered to the dark, but I built forever. It wasn't spite, it was truth carved in years of sweat and silence. Each nail I drove at the warehouse felt like reclaiming a piece of what they'd buried. Revenge wasn't about destroying them anymore. It was about outlasting what they'd become. By fall, our workshops filled with new faces, veterans retraining, single parents, ex-cons starting over. "This place feels honest," one man said, sanding a chair leg smooth. I nodded, knowing honesty was our only currency worth protecting. Cal gave weekly lectures about craftsmanship like a preacher saving lost tools. "Measure twice," he'd repeat, "not because you doubt yourself, but because precision respects the work." His words stuck with the students, and I watched them carry themselves straighter each day. Claire organized a fall open house, inviting donors, neighbors, and local officials. She made me wear a clean shirt, which felt more foreign than any success ever had. When I gave a short speech, I kept it simple. "We don't sell dreams here, we build them with our hands." The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was real. Not long after that event, Marcus showed up unannounced at the warehouse. He looked out of place, his tailored jacket gathering dust near the loading dock. "Heard you're running some kind of trade cult," he joked, half smiling. "Heard you're still chasing quick money," I replied, not bothering to soften it. He sighed, glancing around, his confidence cracking at the edges. "David's in trouble," he said, voice low. "The development stalled. Investors are pulling out." I felt a flicker of something. Pity maybe, but not satisfaction. "You sold soil you didn't understand," I said quietly, "and it's coming due." He stared at the students working nearby, their laughter echoing like freedom. "You really turned nothing into this," he muttered. "No," I said. "I turned loss into proof." He left without saying goodbye, dust trailing behind his expensive shoes. That visit stirred something I hadn't expected, conflict between compassion and justice. I knew Marcus was struggling, but part of me felt he deserved every hardship. Claire noticed my silence later and asked what was wrong. "My brother came by," I said, voice flat. "He's drowning, and I'm not sure if I want to throw a rope." She nodded slowly, understanding what few others could. "You don't owe him rescue," she said, "but you don't owe him revenge either." That night, I replayed her words while tightening bolts on a student's project. I realized success doesn't erase pain. It teaches you how to hold it differently. I wasn't angry anymore, just careful. Careful with people, with trust, with the fragile things you can't rebuild twice. Months later, Wade Works got featured on a regional TV special about rebuilding American trades. The host asked me what success meant now that I'd proven everyone wrong. I smiled at the camera and said, "Success isn't revenge, it's freedom from needing it." When the episode aired, emails flooded in, requests for partnerships, expansion offers, franchise deals. Claire was ecstatic, but I felt the weight of growth pressing again. Cal warned me, "Don't grow faster than your soul, son." I listened, even when ambition whispered otherwise. We expanded slowly, adding a second location in a nearby town. Every new hire had to learn one rule first: no shortcuts ever, because shortcuts, I'd learned, are just lies disguised as efficiency, and I'd already buried too many lies to ever build on one again. The following year, I got an invitation to a business award gala downtown. "They want to honor Wade Works," Claire said, handing me the envelope proudly. I stared at the gold lettering, feeling an old ache surface in my chest. The venue was the same hall where Marcus once hosted investor parties. "Looks like your story's come full circle," Cal said, patting my shoulder. I smiled faintly, realizing he was right. It had. Only this time, I wasn't walking in as the dream they sold. I was walking in as the dream they couldn't buy. The warehouse lights flickered behind me as I locked up that night. Outside, snow began to fall softly, coating the ground like a clean start. And somewhere between pride and peace, I found something worth keeping: dignity unpriced. The turning point didn't come with a headline, it came with a sound: applause. Hundreds of people standing in that downtown hall, hands echoing through glass walls and chandelier light. I stood on stage, the weight of years pressed behind my ribs like an anchor finally lifting. The announcer said, "For community innovation and ethical enterprise, the award goes to Wade Works, founded by Aaron Wade." I froze, remembering the courthouse years ago, The same city, the same air, but this time the applause was for what I built, not what they stole. Claire nudged me forward, whispering, "Smile before you make history look awkward." I laughed under my breath and walked toward the podium. It wasn't victory I felt, it was release. The kind you earn nail by nail, mistake by mistake, until redemption becomes routine. I looked across the crowd, and then I saw them, Marcus and David sitting in the back. They looked older, thinner, their confidence replaced by something humbler, quieter. For a second, the years folded in half, and I saw us as kids again, standing on the farm, arguing about who'd drive the tractor first. "Thank you," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "This award belongs to the people who still believe hard work is worth more than shortcuts." I paused, scanning faces, my eyes catching briefly on my brother's. "It's for anyone who ever lost something they thought defined them, only to learn that character's the only thing no one can steal." The applause returned, heavy, filling the air like forgiveness in disguise. Marcus bowed his head slightly, his hands clapping, slow and deliberate, like penance turned into rhythm. After the ceremony, they approached me, hesitant, like trespassers walking into old land. Marcus spoke first, voice low and uncertain. "You did it," he said, the words thin but sincere. David nodded beside him, eyes down, unable to hold my gaze. "We watched the TV special," Marcus continued, "and we realized how wrong we were. I wanted to be angry, to remind them of every night I spent rebuilding what they'd sold. But I couldn't. Their faces carried enough regret to fill every courtroom and contract that broke us." "You built something we never could," David said softly, "because you didn't build it for money." I nodded slowly, letting the silence between us breathe. "You didn't just sell land," I said quietly. "You sold belonging. I had to make my own." Marcus swallowed hard, then whispered, "Maybe we can earn a place in it someday." Claire found me later, watching them leave the building together under the streetlights. "They came back, huh?" she said, slipping her arm through mine. "They did," I replied, voice thoughtful, not bitter. "Looks like time finally collected its debt." She smiled faintly, her breath fogging in the cold air. "You going to let them back in?" I didn't answer right away, just stared at the skyline. Steel, glass, and neon, layered like a new kind of horizon. "Maybe," I said at last, "but not as brothers in business. Maybe just as men trying to do better." She nodded. "Then that's forgiveness, not weakness." I looked down at her, smiling softly. "Maybe they're the same thing sometimes." The snow started again, tiny flakes catching in the streetlight like confetti no one paid for. A month later, I got a call from the city after a winter flood hit the south side. They needed help rebuilding small workshops, repairing homes, restoring what the storm took. "You're the only team with the tools and the trust," the mayor said. I hung up, staring at the phone for a long time before dialing Cal. "You ready to get your hands dirty again, old man?" I asked. He laughed on the other end. "You know retirement's just a myth for stubborn people like us." Within a week, Wade Works transformed into an emergency rebuild crew. Students volunteered, locals brought food, and even Marcus showed up one morning with gloves. "I figured you'd need more hands," he said awkwardly. "I won't say no," I replied, handing him a hammer. He smiled weakly. "I remember how to use one." "Good," I said. "Let's see if your heart remembers too." The flood project lasted 6 months, the hardest and most rewarding work we'd ever done. We rebuilt homes, repaired roofs, and gave people back pieces of their lives. Every day, Marcus showed up before sunrise and left after dark, never complaining. David joined later, coordinating supplies with quiet precision. Watching them work side by side with my team was surreal, like ghosts learning to live again. One night, after a 12-hour shift, Marcus sat beside me on the back of a flatbed truck. "You know," he said, "I used to think money fixed everything." I handed him a thermos of coffee and said, "It just hides what's broken until it leaks through." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I wish I'd learned that when Dad was still around." I nodded. "You just learned it in a different way." His eyes glistened, but he smiled anyway. When the project ended, the city hosted a thank you event downtown. This time, I insisted my brothers stand beside me on stage. "This wasn't my work alone," I said to the crowd. "It was ours. It always was." The applause that followed wasn't for fame, it was for reconciliation. Afterward, Marcus pulled me aside, tears threatening his voice. "You didn't have to share this with us," he said. "No," I replied, "but maybe sharing is what keeps it worth having." David nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. We broke the family once, he said, but you rebuilt it better than we deserved. I smiled faintly. Then let's keep it standing this time. For the first time in years, I felt my father's presence again, not as memory, but as peace standing between us. That night, after everyone left, I drove back to the lake. The field was gone now, replaced by houses lined in symmetry, perfect but soulless. I parked by the fence and walked to the water's edge. The reflection of city lights shimmered across the ripples, fragile yet enduring. I knelt down, scooped a handful of mud, and let it slip through my fingers. You taught me well, old man, I whispered to the wind. Dreams can be sold, but purpose can't. Behind me I heard footsteps, Marcus and David, quiet but close. We were wrong, Marcus said softly. We know. I nodded, not needing the words anymore. Together we stood there, the three of us, watching the lake breathe. For once it didn't feel like loss. It felt like belonging returned. The reunion came quietly, almost like life testing whether peace was permanent. It was early spring, and Wade Works was hosting its 5-year anniversary event. The old warehouse had transformed into something beautiful, sunlight streaming through new windows, fresh coats of paint, and banners that read, "Built by hands, held by hearts." People from all over Tulsa came, from mayors to mailmen, everyone whose life had brushed against ours. Claire had planned everything down to the last detail, running around with a clipboard like a storm in heels. Cal sat near the entrance, looking proud, muttering to anyone who'd listen, told the boy he'd turned scrap into soul. And among the crowd, almost hidden near the back, stood Marcus and David. No suits this time, no polished pride, just jeans, flannel shirts, and expressions that carried a quiet mix of regret and hope. When I spotted them, my chest tightened, not from anger but recognition. They walked toward me slowly, as if approaching sacred ground. "Nice place you built," Marcus said, glancing around, his voice soft but sincere. "You helped," I said, surprising even myself. "With what?" David asked, confused. "With the mistakes," I answered, smiling faintly. "Without them, I'd have had nothing to rise from." Marcus nodded, understanding heavy in his eyes. "We can't undo what we did," he said, "but we can learn to live right from here." His tone didn't ask forgiveness. It earned it through honesty. "Then start by helping today," I said, motioning toward the workshop tables. "We're short on hands for the demo build." They grinned sheepishly, and for the first time in years, we worked side by side again. No tension, no scoreboard, just shared silence that finally felt like family. The ceremony began at noon, the air thick with sawdust and laughter. Claire introduced me with her usual dramatic flair, calling me the most stubborn visionary in Oklahoma. The crowd laughed, and I stepped forward, nervous but grounded. 5 years ago, I began, this was a flooded warehouse with broken beams and broken hearts. Now it's proof that what's built with purpose can't be sold for profit, it can only be shared. I paused, scanning the crowd until my eyes landed on my brothers again. "And sometimes," I continued, "you have to lose everything to understand what matters most." The applause felt different this time, gentle, like rain after drought. Behind me, Cal whispered, "You found your voice, son." I smiled because for once I believed him. After the speeches, people wandered the floor, exploring exhibits and student projects. One of the young apprentices, a quiet kid named Eli, tugged at my sleeve. "Mr. Wade," he said shyly, "your brothers are cool. They showed me how to cut smoother edges." I looked over and saw Marcus teaching him how to steady the saw with patience I never knew he had. David was helping another group assemble a frame, laughing softly when they got it wrong. Watching them, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe redemption isn't a moment. Maybe it's a process, measured not in apologies, but in actions repeated long enough to rewrite memory. "They're learning," I told Eli, smiling, "just like you are." And for the first time, I wasn't teaching my brothers through anger. I was teaching them through example. Later that afternoon, Mom arrived, leaning on her cane, eyes misty with pride. "You boys together again?" she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. Marcus hugged her first, followed by David, and then she turned to me. "You did what your father always wanted," she whispered, gripping my hand. "You brought his sons home." I swallowed hard, unable to speak, because her words hit deeper than any award or headline ever could. "He'd be proud," she added, looking around the bustling workshop, "not just of this place, but of who you've become." I kissed her cheek and said softly, "He's here, Mom. He's been here since the first hammer swing." She smiled through tears, whispering, then don't stop swinging. And I promised her I wouldn't. Not as long as there was something honest left to build. That evening, after the crowd thinned and lights dimmed, my brothers stayed behind. Feels good to sweat for something real again, Marcus said, wiping his forehead. Better than pretending to be rich, David added, chuckling weakly. We sat on the loading dock, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. The silence between us wasn't awkward, it was earned. You remember when Dad made us fix that old shed? I asked, smiling. Marcus laughed. Yeah, and you yelled because we nailed the hinges wrong. We didn't know better, David said quietly. Now we do, I replied. The laughter faded into stillness, and for a moment, all three of us just sat there, watching the first stars appear. It felt like forgiveness without words, like time finally softening around us. Claire joined us with coffee, sitting cross-legged on the concrete. So, this is what peace looks like, she said, handing out cups. Marcus smiled faintly. Didn't think we'd earn front row seats to it. Peace doesn't sell, Claire said. That's why it's priceless, David chuckled. You sound like Aaron now. She smirked. He rubs off on people, whether they like it or not. I laughed, shaking my head. You're all giving me too much credit. This was built by everyone who refused to quit. Marcus raised his cup, saying, Then here's to refusal. We clinked cups, coffee spilling slightly, but no one cared. The sky above turned darker, and the city hummed around us, quiet but alive. A few days later, I drove back to the old field one last time. The townhomes were finally finished, clean and expensive, but soulless in their perfection. I parked at the edge of the property, where a small patch of wild grass still grew. I stood there, letting the wind brush through me, listening for the echoes of our childhood. Marcus and David joined me minutes later, neither saying a word. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at what used to be home. You ever think he forgives us? Marcus asked quietly. Dad? I said. He already did. The day we started over. David nodded, wiping his eyes. Guess we just needed to forgive ourselves next. I smiled faintly. We're getting there. The sun dipped low, and the light fell over the three of us like a benediction. On the drive back, I thought about how strange life was, how pain becomes the blueprint for purpose. My brothers had once stolen my future, but somehow they'd helped me find a better one. What we'd built together couldn't be bought or sold. It was something beyond price. As the road stretched ahead, I realized the reunion wasn't just a family gathering. It was a full-circle moment where revenge dissolved into redemption. The same hands that broke everything once were now building again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole, steady, and at peace with every step forward. Guilt is a slow visitor. It doesn't knock, it settles in like dust. After the anniversary, life carried on, but something in Marcus changed quietly. He'd stop by the workshop often, helping with small projects or just sweeping floors no one asked him to. David came too sometimes, though he stayed quieter, always working with focus that looked like apology turned into muscle memory. I'd catch them both watching me sometimes, the way people look at someone they used to underestimate. You still think about it? Marcus asked one evening, sanding a table leg smooth. Every day, I said honestly, but not the way you think. He nodded, eyes far away. I guess I'm just learning what regret feels like when it doesn't fix anything. I didn't know how to answer that, so I just handed him another board. Sometimes silence does what words can't. It forgives without promise. It understands without agreement. Over time, their presence stopped feeling strange. Marcus handled deliveries. David trained new apprentices. It became routine. Yet guilt hung in the air like sawdust, visible in sunlight, but harmless if left alone. One afternoon, Mom came by and found us all working in rhythm, three men finally moving the same direction. You boys look just like your father, she said, tears filling her voice. Marcus smiled weakly. Yeah, he whispered, but we broke his field before we became his sons again. She reached for him, holding his arm tightly. And now you're fixing it, she said softly. Maybe not the land, but the name. Weeks later, I found Marcus sitting outside the workshop long after everyone left. He had an envelope in his hands, yellowed from the humidity. What's that? I asked, sitting beside him. Dad's will, he said quietly. I found it in Mom's attic. Thought you should read it. I unfolded the paper. Old ink, faded but legible enough. It didn't mention money or property. It only said, to my boys, build something together. Whatever it is, make it honest. I stared at the words until they blurred, my throat tightening. Marcus wiped his face roughly. We failed him, Aaron. he said, voice breaking. We sold his dream for a handful of checks that didn't last 6 months. I folded the paper carefully, handing it back. You didn't fail him, I said. You just took the long road to his lesson. Guilt had changed them more than punishment ever could. Marcus spent weekends mentoring kids, teaching them budgeting and business with honesty as the foundation. David started helping a church program that rebuilt homes for low-income families. Feels like penance, David said once, smiling faintly. Feels like purpose, I corrected. Their work wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about living right after learning wrong. Still, late at night, I'd hear Marcus pacing through the workshop, haunted by memories money couldn't drown. One evening, he stopped at my office door and said, I used to think you hated me. I shook my head. No, I just hated what you made me become. He nodded slowly, understanding. Then thank you, he said softly, for becoming it anyway. Samantha, Claire, told me once that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It just changes the lens. And she was right. I started seeing my brothers not as betrayers, but as men burdened by lessons they paid for dearly. Their guilt wasn't something I had to cure. It was something they had to carry until it taught them peace. The strange part was how gentle life became when I stopped trying to balance the scales. The world didn't need to be fair. It just needed to be faced. You ever wonder what Dad would think now? Marcus asked one morning while fixing a window latch. I think he'd tell us to stop asking what he'd think, I said, smiling. He'd probably just hand us a hammer. We both laughed then, the sound lighter than it had been in years. A few months later, WadeWorks was asked to host a national trades conference. The idea of speaking in front of hundreds again made my stomach tighten. You've done this before, Claire said, adjusting my tie before I went on stage. Yeah, I said, but this time feels different. It did, because this time my brothers were in the front row, sitting side by side, smiling like they belonged there. My voice shook as I began. People say revenge builds walls, I told the audience, but dignity builds doors. And sometimes, the people who broke you are the ones who walk through them last. The crowd stood, clapping, but my eyes never left my brothers. Marcus mouthed, "Thank you." David just nodded, his eyes wet, and for the first time the applause didn't feel like vindication, it felt like peace spreading outward. Afterward, Marcus pulled me aside. "You ever think you'll really forgive us?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, the man who once stole everything from me, and saw someone who'd finally learned what wealth really meant. "I already did," I said simply. "I just didn't announce it." He smiled, relief softening every line on his face. "You always were the quiet one," he said. "Guess that's what made you dangerous." We laughed, not at the past, but through it. Later that night, I stood outside under the city lights, the same sky that had watched every rise and fall. Forgiveness hadn't made me weaker. It had made me untouchable, because when you stop needing revenge, no one can ever own your peace again. In the weeks that followed, the workshop thrived like never before. Word spread nationally, partnerships formed, and WadeWorks became a model for ethical trade education across the Midwest. Reporters called me a self-made visionary, a title that never sat comfortably. I wasn't self-made, I corrected one interviewer. I was rebuilt by failure, by honesty, by everyone who stayed when they didn't have to. Marcus overheard that and smiled. "Guess that includes us, huh?" he said later, teasing lightly. "Yeah," I replied, "especially you." For the first time, the word brother felt whole again, healed of bitterness. Guilt had done its job. It had humbled, softened, restored, and in its aftermath, all that remained was gratitude for the distance we'd walked to meet again. Reflection feels heavier when peace finally settles in. It's like silence with weight. The workshop was quiet that night, machines asleep. Sawdust settled in gold patches under the lights. I sat on the same workbench where I'd once eaten dinner alone, broke and bitter, now surrounded by everything I'd built with open hands. The hammer Dad left me hung on the wall above the chalkboard. I'd stopped using it years ago, not out of disuse, but reverence. It wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a compass pointing toward honesty. Cal had passed away a few months earlier, peacefully, and I could still hear him saying, "Keep the work honest, and the rest takes care of itself." I whispered those words now, feeling them land differently. He was right. Everything else had taken care of itself, including me. The city had honored us again that month, but I didn't go to the ceremony. I let Claire and the team take the stage instead, their laughter filling the photos I saw later online. You're becoming a ghost in your own success, she told me that evening. Maybe that's how you know you've done it right, I replied. She smiled and said, You're impossible. But she understood. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the work to outlive me. Legacy isn't about names etched in stone. It's about habits that survive their maker. I'd spent too long chasing validation I never needed. Now my joy came from watching others find theirs without permission. That's how I knew the dream I'd built couldn't be bought, because it was already shared. Marcus called every week now, so not out of guilt, but genuine care. Mom's cooking Sunday, he said one morning. You coming? Wouldn't miss it, I said, smiling. We didn't talk about business anymore, just weather, nieces, and whatever new joke David learned. Our conversations had turned into what they should have been all along, simple, human, unguarded. Sometimes Marcus would ask, You ever think about the land? And I'd pause, picturing the rows of houses standing where our childhood once grew. Not as much as I used to, I'd say honestly. I learned that home isn't dirt, it's what you build with who you've become. He never argued after that, maybe because he finally believed it too, maybe because we both realized you can't own peace, you can only maintain it. That fall, Claire convinced me to write a book, a collection of lessons and stories from the workshop. People need to know what you stood for, she said, eyes fierce behind her glasses. I told her I wasn't a writer. She said I was a builder, and that's the same thing if you do it right. So, I wrote, late nights, quiet mornings, each word like a nail finding its place. I wrote about my father's patience, my mother's resilience, Cal's blunt wisdom, and the brothers who taught me the cost of shortcuts. When I finished, I didn't title it Wade Works or The Dream They Sold. I called it The Things You Can't Buy. It wasn't about revenge, it was about the grace that follows it. The publisher loved it, but I didn't care about sales. I cared that it was true. When the book came out, letters started arriving from across the country. A single father in Ohio wrote that our story made him restart his carpentry business. A woman in Maine said her sons reconciled after hearing my interview on the radio. One message simply said, Thank you for reminding me that redemption doesn't expire. I read that one twice and kept it folded in my wallet. Sometimes I'd take it out when doubt crept back in, like a talisman against cynicism. Life, I realized, doesn't hand out closure. It hands you chances to rewrite your ending, and every time I helped someone build theirs, a little part of my old hurt faded quietly. I hadn't just built a workshop, I'd built a way to keep forgiving the world, one nail at a time. Years later, the lake dried halfway one summer, exposing cracked mud and weeds. I went back there one last time, this time alone. The Wade Point Estates sign was rusted, the paint peeling, the lots mostly empty. The world had moved on from the development that destroyed our past. I stood at the edge of the waterline, the wind rough but clean, and I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to rebuild what they'd taken. I knelt and pressed my palm into the dry earth, whispering, You can rest now. Behind me the horizon stretched wide, the same sky that had watched every mistake, every triumph. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't something you give, it's something you grow into, quietly, like roots beneath forgotten soil. Back at the warehouse, I unlocked the door and turned on the lights one last time that night. The smell of wood and metal filled the air, familiar as breath. Photos lined the wall, students, projects, faces smiling in sawdust sunlight. I ran my hand over one photo of Marcus and David, helping Eli build his first table. Their faces glowed with joy, not regret. That image said everything words never could. I thought about Dad, about Cal, about how both of them would have laughed seeing us now. We weren't perfect sons, but we'd learned the lesson buried in the work. What you build with integrity stays standing even when the builder is gone. That's what they meant by legacy. That's what I'd been chasing all along. The night ended the way all endings should, quietly, without applause. I walked outside and locked the door, the sound sharp and final in the cold air. Overhead the stars burned steady, no brighter for my success, no dimmer for my pain. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and smiled. The dream they sold had become something untouchable, something too honest to appraise, too real to steal. Tomorrow, new hands would open those doors, and that was enough for me. I looked at the horizon and whispered to no one, They sold my dream for cash, but I built one they couldn't buy. If this story found you tonight, then maybe it was meant to. Tell me, would you forgive the ones who sold your dream, or would you build one they could never own?